So what do you do? Let's start to wrap this thing up and start to give some tangible stuff to what we've been building on here. How are you going to attract your A players? How are you going to attract your target, right? How are you going to get the people that are the A players that will be aligned with you, will be in lockstep with you? How do you get them to self-identify and raise your hand and raise their hand so that you can find them, right? A very famous marketer once said, he called it racking the shotgun. Everybody knows, if you've watched a movie or in life, what racking the shotgun sounds like, right? And if you know what that sound is like, you're going to turn and look and go, whoa, what was that noise? And that was what he was trying to explain. How do you get people to self-identify? What noise or what message do you need to put out into the marketplace to get your whether you're hiring or trying to find the right patients? How do you get people to self-identify? Yeah, that's me, and I want to go there. There's 4 stages for recruiting A players. And what often happens, I talked about this a little up front, is we often ignore recruiting and we think about our hiring system. And what David was talking about with the hiring system was, we had the Venn diagram, right? And we have the 3 components that we really need in order to find and get the right A players. And what often happens is we're only looking at one of them. We're only looking at skill sets. And when we only hire people based on skill set, if I go back here and we look at this Venn diagram real quick, if we're only hiring people based on skill set, whether they can clinically do a job or not, that leads to a lot of the problems that we've been talking about. You get 30 days down the road, you're misaligned, they got a bad attitude, they're not accountable, they show up a minute late and leave a minute early, yet somehow their time card always shows that they were there for the full day. It's an amazing phenomenon. No matter how late they get there or early they leave, somehow they always get paid for 32 or 40 hours a week. And that's what happens. If you don't hire for impact and approach, you end up with people that you let go 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later. And that's a problem. So how do we define our target? Then after we've identified, okay, this is who my A player is. Now, how are we going to build the machine to go and attract those A players and engage them, right? This thing, the faster that we can get a scalable and repeatable process, the more and better A players that we're going to be able to get into our practice so that we can start building that bench strength up, right? Plenty of all-star players, basketball players, have had poor bench strength, and as a result, they don't have any championship rings. Plenty of big names don't have. Who's seen the famous Michael Jordan video where he talks about his championship rings and he talks about who doesn't have 6 rings on their finger, right? That's what we're talking about here. Michael Jordan had an all-star team. Not only was he one of the greatest players of all time, up there with, Babe Ruth and, Muhammad Ali and these incredible athletes, but he had an incredible team of A players behind him. And that's what this thing is all about. The reality is when you're going to recruit, and subsequently we'll talk about in a future webinar, hiring, this is a numbers game. And in order to win the numbers game, you've got to understand each stage. Now, you all have heard us talk about the 5 A's. In your practice, how do you make more money? How do you increase your collections? Well, you got to follow the 5 A's. We've got to answer our calls, appoint the patients, attend appointments, get patients to accept treatment, and then carry an average case or patient value that is stable and increasing. The same is true in recruiting and hiring, right? This is a numbers game. The strategies at each of these phases are a little different, and that's the power in this. But realize if you're recruiting C players if C players are responding to your job posting and you're interviewing 10 or 15 or interviewing 100 people, the chances of you hiring an A player round to zero. If your recruiting is generating C players, you can't hire A players. That's just the way it is. If your marketing is generating Medicaid patients, you're not going to get any all-on-4 cases or large restorative implant cases or whatever. I'm just trying to create an analogy here. You've got to get the right people in the top of your funnel. This is analogous to if you're not answering your phones, you can't appoint patients. If you're not appointing them, they're not going to attend their appointments, right? If they're not attending their appointments, there's nothing for you to get acceptance on. All these things are numbers games, and you got to understand the numbers. The practice that gets the most high quality applicants is going to win the talent game. And that's the game that's being played right now coming out of this COVID-19 crisis. Your best recruiting channels, start with internal referrals and see if your A players in your practice know other A players, right? Warren Buffett said, if I want to know how much money you make, I'm just going to look at your 3 closest friends. And what he's really saying is, if your 3 closest friends, birds of a feather flock together. And your A players are going to know other A players, right? Look for external referrals. We talked about a little bit earlier. External referrals are okay. They're just not, there's no holy grail here. There's no secret pocket of A players that when you find it, you just go back to that pond and keep fishing. And every time you pull a fish out, it's an A player. Social media is great.
And I will say on the external referral side, one of the things that we've seen is the quality of your external referrals will actually increase when the people around you actually know what you're looking for. Instead of them just guessing and identifying who they think is great, they can better say, oh, hey, no, I think this person matches what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And that overall quality will go up. Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
Yeah. So let's think about like this. Let's think about what your practice was able to produce, what you produce and collected. Remember, because I don't want to talk theoretical of, well, geez, I had this uncollectible and my accounts receivable and these insurance write-downs. That stuff's important, very important for another conversation. We're not going to have that conversation right now. Let's talk about what you collected in 2019. And then let's outline all of the problems your team experienced in 2019 because you didn't have A players in every role of your practice. And I think if you guys have a pen and paper, I keep a pen and paper right here, and I'm writing stuff down all the time. I think this would be great if you've got a pen and paper handy to start writing this information down. Think about what you collected. Think about all the problems that you experienced because you didn't have an A player in every role. And now let's quantify that. What could your practice have produced if you had A players in every role? Right? Anytime there's drama in your practice, it's not about the time. I'll give you an example. If you've got drama in your practice, you've got 2 team members that are fighting, not literally, hopefully, but you got 2 team members that are just not aligned, and it's the blame game and cold shoulder and whatever it is, drama happening there, right? And you got to deal with that. This isn't just about your time. It affects everything. Your patients pick up on it. Your other team members see you accepting mediocrity. Anytime you have B or C players in your practice, anytime you're dealing with drama and inefficiency, you're writing a check that you're paying the price even if you don't win. You're sacrificing something and you're signing a check even if you're not winning, right? It goes back to the Lee Iacocca story. Most of you in here have heard it. I'll give you the quick version. 1979, Lee Iacocca went to Congress and said, I need $1.5 billion to save Chrysler Motor. Congress laughed at him, and Lee said, okay, understand, you're not making a decision to give me $1.5 billion or not to give me the money. You're making a decision right now to either give me $1.5 billion to save Chrysler, or you're going to sign a $3 billion check tomorrow when I lay off 400,000 people. And that is so true in every aspect of our practices and businesses in life. The choice is not, do I do this or not? The choice is, do I do this, or am I going to sign the check somewhere else? And what's the best option? And let's look at the second and third order consequences to figure this thing out. Here's where you kind of need to focus on. Here's 4 great places to start looking. LinkedIn, Monster, Career Builder, external referrals, internal referrals. Those are a few good places. Different markets have different hotspots of areas that work better. And you're going to find that you might have more A players coming from one lead source versus another. Some lead sources are worth paying $1,500 to post your ad. Others aren't worth the $50 you pay them. And I think you'll find as you test, my dad loves to pick on me. Anytime I call my dad for advice, he throws my own expression back in my face. And he says, Colin, your opinion doesn't matter. Just test it, which is what I tell him every time he calls me for advice too. Your opinion doesn't matter. Test it. Test the marketing. Test the message. How do we test this rapidly and move on? How can you test the LinkedIn sponsored post for $1,000 against the Career Builder post for $75, right? And you might find that you get 100 A players on one and you get nothing. I don't know. Test it. Your opinion doesn't count. So let's talk a little bit about referrals. I talked about Warren Buffett's quote, birds of a feather flock together. If you've already got an A player, go ask them for referrals. If they are happy in your practice and they love what you're doing, they're going to tell all their friends and they're going to bring more A players to your practice. If you go to your B and your C players and you ask them for referrals, I promise you, you're going to get more B and C players. That's just how this works. If you're not clear on what your employment promise is, and I'm going to talk to you about that in the very next slide, they're not going to be either. You're the visionary. And if they're not clear on it, nobody else is going to be. Why do they want to work for you? Why do they want to work in your practice? The number of internal referrals you're getting is a great measurement to the success of the practice and the systems that you've built. If you're not getting any internal referrals, that's a sign. And this is not unlike your patients. If you're not getting 50% of your new patients from referrals, that's a big old red flag, right? We got some practices that get 75% of their new patients from referrals. And they are absolutely on fire. I mean, they're like afterburner F-16 fighter jet on fire. And that is a truly screaming busy practice when you've got that many referrals coming in. If you're getting 25 or 30% or less of your new patients coming from direct referrals from your existing patients, what's not running right? Where do we need to put a little oil? What do we need to rebuild? What do we need to fix? Same way with your people. We ought to be getting a steady stream of, hey, I got this friend. Do you think we're going to have a job opening available? Hey, I know this girl, she's kind of looking. She's not, her resume's not out there. She's in a job, but she's available, right? Hey, I got this friend. Here's her resume. Can I forward you this email? Can I connect you to? If you're not having that kind of conversation, there's something going on. Maybe it's the wrong people. Maybe it's the employment promise. Maybe it's a number of things. But knowing your numbers and having a dashboard on how many referrals are you getting is something I want to know in my business.
If I can add into that, Colin,
yeah.
This is one of those areas. One of the things that we teach at the advanced level is always be recruiting. Always. Always have your hopper full. That person is going to come in. And if they're really excited about it, you don't have to pull the trigger on them right away. They'll wait a few months until it's the right time, but always be recruiting, but have that strategy out there that allows that recruiting and those referrals to come to you more organically, as opposed to you having to continuously engage in very specific recruiting activities.
Yeah, I mean, you can't be back on the heels of your feet every time you've got somebody that is, gets sick, or well, sick is probably not the right example. But if you've got people that leave, or you're not able to retain your people, every time somebody leaves, you're back on the heels of your feet trying to react to the situation. Let's get up on the balls of our feet. Let's fill up our hopper. If we're out there and we're always recruiting and we always know who our next person we want to hire is, and they know that we're looking at them. When you see these Fortune 500 companies and one week they fire their CEO and the next week they've brought in an A player to replace him, that conversation has been happening for years, right? You see a VP or a director, some high-level person, they have been cultivating that conversation for years. And that's an extreme example. But if you've got a mission-critical role or an important role, and in private dental practice, every role is important, right? There should be nobody in your practice that you look at and you go, that's not an essential role, right? An unessential role in private practice is called unemployed. That's called laid off. And you always want to know who's the next person I'm going to plug in there. If this hygienist doesn't come back to work because she's scared about COVID-19, who am I going to plug in there? If my assistant, my rock star A player assistant, if she doesn't want to come back and I'm reopening, who is going to be my next A player there? And if you're going to take, 4 to 6 weeks to go through a whole hiring process, I mean, let's make sure we take our time and do it right. But that starts adding pain and time to our process. And the faster that we can plug in our A players, the faster that we're going to get back to the business of dentistry. Let's talk about the employment promise. This is a very powerful, very simple concept that 5% of practices in the country actually have. Maybe less. I don't know. David, do you have a stat on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think 5% is generous.
Yeah.
But this is, if any, for a lot of practices that are even in this realm, it's really more, it's not actually articulated into an artifact that they can publish out. It's something more that they just generally talk about. But yeah.
If you're saying to yourself, there's no dental hygienist available in my market area to hire, then what I'm hearing you say is I'm a B player practice and every other one of my competitors around me is an A player. That's when I have a practice that tells me I can't hire somebody, I can't fill a position. Typically, what is wrong is there's something broken in the recruiting and hiring or at the practice level. The image. I'll give you a great example. We had a client many years ago in a southern state that if you Google his name, the first thing that comes up is he got sued by the federal government for Medicare fraud. If I go Google your name and that's what comes up, that's probably not, that's not a good thing. And the number of A players that are going to go work for that dentist rounds to zero. The number of patients also that are going to go to that dentist also rounds to a very low number. And that's an extreme example. But if an A player is looking at your practice, they're going to go Google you. They're going to look at not only your patient reviews, they're going to look at your Glassdoor reviews. We're going to get into that here in a few minutes. They're going to check you out, right? It's that much harder for your team members to confidently refer their friends if they're not 100% sure of what the standard is. What is the standard? What are you doing? if all you want to do is drill and fill, there's going to be plenty of associate positions available when this country reopens. I would encourage you, if all you want to do is dentistry, that might be the right fit for you. If you're trying to go build something bigger and better and have the brighter future and grow your team and offer your team bigger potential, bigger opportunities in the future to do something different for your patients, right? Why don't you go work for corporate dentistry or the local DSO or whatever it is? I think it's because you also want to do something different for your patients, right? And all those questions I just asked, we just need to kind of codify that. We just need to write it down. And it takes a little bit of time to kind of figure out why you're doing what you're doing sometimes. We kind of got to, you've got it in your head right now, and we just kind of have to unpack it. But when you unpack it, you end up with this promise of why you exist. Why does a staff, why does an A player want to leave her employment that she's at, the bird in the hand, to come work at your practice, right? You're the bird in the bush. When unemployment was at 3% nationally, everybody that was worth anything had a job. Why do they want to leave the job they have, the bird in the hand, to work for you? You're the bird in the bush. You're the unknown factor, right? Even if they don't like where they're at, it's the devil you know versus the one you don't. If you don't have your best foot forward, even the people that are employed, this employment market is just a pendulum, right? It had swung far to one side 3 months ago, and employees had a lot more control, right? They could command higher salaries. They could be more picky because unemployment was so low. Now the pendulum has swung back, and the employer is going to have a lot more control moving forward. They're going to have the higher unemployment is going to give them a lot more choices. I'm going to predict that salaries, not immediately, but they're definitely going to come down or be stagnated as we come out of this thing, right? Because they're going to be able to. What is it that you're striving to achieve for every person on your team is a great question to ask. What gives your people greater confidence that they can refer their friends to you and have a predictable outcome, right? It's the same thing you need to be asking about your patients. Why do your patients want to refer to you? What's the predictable outcome you're going to create for their friends when your patients and your team refer to you? Here's another great question. How many patients do your team members refer to you? Have you ever had a patient refer a team member to you? Have you ever had a team member refer a patient to you? All these things are very synergistic. And when you figure out one component, it's oftentimes the same engine. It's just, instead of patients, it's team members or associates, if that's your model, right? This recruiting thing, it's the same thing. We just got to go figure it out.